Well, what can we say about this one? John's already groaned. I haven't even read out what we're talking about yet. But it is the fact that, Microsoft has basically stirred up a hornet's nest and then sat on it by announcing massive revisions to the Game Pass value proposition, which basically, you can't really paper over the cracks here. It is essentially a massive price hike to the ultimate tier, kind of papered over by value-added stuff that people probably weren't interested in. John, you've been a particular critic of Game Pass, I guess, over the years. I guess the sort of, what could you say, the mitigating factor has always been the value. And now there's big question marks over the value. What's your take on all of this?
Oh boy, we have to be delicate with this discussion, I think, because it does kind of feel like Microsoft is just kind of taking fans of the Xbox console specifically out into the woodshed in the backyard and giving them the one over, if you know what I mean. Or maybe you don't, I don't know. It's not good news, I would say. My first thought was like, see, I kind of told you so. But, I don't want to... Look, I mean, the value proposition that Game Pass represented in the past was inarguably extremely good. And my feeling was always that it was too good. And in fact, there was some potential harm in terms of devaluing the concept of what games actually cost. And when you're offering so many games, including all these day one things for like the price that it used to be, that's just like a ton of quote unquote value, right? Absolutely, no question, especially when you start including like Call of Duty in there, which they did. Like that's pretty nuts, right? Like to have one of the biggest games in the world, just like bam, there it is. You get it with your service. But this stuff's not free. Now, I think this could have worked as it was if the install base for Game Pass itself had continued to expand significantly. But I think that they actually do need to they needed more of an install base for this to work in the way that they perhaps wanted. And it feels like they put all of their chips in on this Game Pass concept several years ago, saying, okay, we can't beat the others at their own game, so let's try this. And they did actually find some success with it. The public loved it. The value was insane. But it did not help change the playfield. And unfortunately, they weren't able to necessarily sell the number of units necessarily to keep this sustainable. And I also think that it's, not being on the other consoles, which I'm not sure why they would let it on there necessarily. But if this had been on like PlayStation and Switch as well, I think that could have also kept things going for a while longer anyway. But ultimately, what you're dealing with here is like Microsoft has become... So while the Xbox itself as a console, I think, is in a not good spot, I think Microsoft as a games publisher is doing pretty well. And they have a gigantic catalog of games at their disposal and just tons and tons of developers, to the point where that probably makes this whole thing less, sustainable than it was initially when they were much smaller, right? And I think that's just kind of where we're at. So I don't think this is like the end of Microsoft or anything. I think really they're just getting started in terms of becoming like one of the biggest games publishers in the world, certainly in the West side. But I do think we are really seeing like a slow motion end to Xbox as we knew it. And given something else that we've been talking about recently, Rich, regarding like 360 and upcoming anniversary, I do find it genuinely sad, because like there was this energy around Xbox 360. Like they were really in an awesome place there, and it's gone. They never recaptured that again.
And it's sort of like a sort of downward trend, basically, from the release of Xbox One. You had this sort of, I guess you had a nice sort of perk back upwards with Xbox One X, which really was a remarkable machine for the time. But since then, it just seems to have been like, just a decline of the brand, really, and a decline of the success. And you're right, the sort of energy that's sort of surrounding Xbox it's just not really quite what it was.
No. And like on top of that, I mean, I'm getting increasingly worried about just like, especially the Western game industry more than anything else. And Microsoft itself is currently, I mean, they've been through a ton of layoffs. They're not the only one. You know, they're closing studios here and there. There's been plenty of games canceled. They're bumping up massively the price of their big like subscription service. They're increasing console prices. The console sales are down. You know, they're not really selling any units by themselves and so on. Like I'm seeing all these points kind of out and about there, and it's like it's all true when you think about it. But it's not like, you know, the PlayStation 5 is certainly doing a lot better, but it's not really setting the world on fire either in terms of like the amount of software available and like the output from Sony and all this kind of stuff, right? In the Switch 2 as well.
Well,
I would say the Switch 2 is off to a very slow start, with Nintendo seemingly afraid to put their whole foot in the door, and they're kind of like straddling this line between last and next gen, but it just all feels a bit negative, and my negativity was only tempered a bit by the experience at Tokyo Game Show this year, actually, which we'll get to later.
right. Okay. I think it's fair to point out that Switch 2 has been a phenomenal launch
No,
success. And Sony are saying that PlayStation 5 is its most profitable
I
generation ever.
I know, it's just when you actually look at the stuff coming out for them from the
Right.
gamer's perspective, it's not as exciting as the numbers would leave you believe. Microsoft, on the other hand, is, they don't have the sales or the software, I guess you could say. Like they're struggling on all fronts.
Well, let's just talk about what's happening with Game Pass. Let's just drill down into the
All right, let's
specifics
do
here.
it.
There's three tiers here, but you've got your essential tier, which is going to be $10 a month, which has like a core of 50 games available, unlimited cloud gaming. This is a bit of a weird benefit. In-game benefits, including for Riot games. It's kind of all very sort of specific to have as your third line on your list of benefits.
It's not good.
Online console multiplayer, which is just kind of like a rude reminder that you're paying for core features that PC gamers get for free. And moving on to premium, 200 games, $15 a month. New Xbox published games within a year of launch. So you've got to wait for obviously the key thing about Game Pass in the past was, you would get all of the Microsoft first party output, day and date. Which is pretty good, but that's your $15 now basically means that you have to wait for a year or within a year.
Except for Call of Duty. That's a big caveat.
Right. Okay.
Oh, good spot, Oliver.
Yeah.
You get the unlimited cloud gaming and those weird in-game benefits as well for Riot's games. Ultimate does give you basically everything that you've previously had for a lot cheaper price. They're upping the amount of day one games, and you're getting Ubisoft Plus Classics and EA Play included. And that's the kind of weird thing. The Fortnite crew.
Oh, baby. Here we go.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really escape the feeling that they've basically been looking for things to bolt onto Game Pass Ultimate to potentially kind of justify the price increase, but it just doesn't really cut it. A large cross-section of the audience aren't really going to have any kind of interest at all in Fortnite crew, for God's sake. Indeed, somebody's pointed out that if you're that invested into Fortnite, you're probably playing quite a lot of Fortnite. And so why would you be interested in 400 plus games as part of the Game Pass Ultimate thing? The thing about it is, it's what can you say? It is basically the core thing about Game Pass, the key sort of USP to it, so to speak. The thing that set it apart from the PlayStation offering has always been the fact that you were going to get those Microsoft games coming day and date. And you're kind of not anymore unless you pay a huge increase in price. Oliver, you got a lot to say about this. Crack on, by all means.
Yeah, so I think the price increase here is just staggering to me because as recently as a year ago, I think as of July of last year, Game Pass was $17 USD a month for the ultimate tier. And now
Wow.
it's $30 a month. That's a colossal increase. They've added a bunch of stuff, but like you said, I think Fortnite is not going to appeal to all players. And I think there's a declining marginal utility as you pile on extra game content, especially archival game content, which the Ubisoft content is mostly older content, games that are, over 3 years old. A lot of games from like the Xbox 360 generation, even, they're older titles. In Game Pass, you already have such a huge library of old games to access. Most of the Game
Yeah.
Pass titles are indeed older titles. So I feel like the utility of that is fairly low when you already have the Game Pass service. And the reason why I personally subscribe to Game Pass has been for those day one Microsoft games primarily, and they're just jacking up the price of that hugely.
Yep.
Now, I have seen some people note that there is still one remaining service that we haven't discussed today that is potentially quite appealing, which is PC Games Pass. Now, PC Game Pass, it's gone up in price from $12 a month to $16.50 a month in the United States, with no apparent service changes. But it slots in really weirdly into the existing offerings, like it's only for PC. If I Google Game Pass right now, even PC Game Pass, the only results that come up, or at least what they redirect to, is just the regular Game Pass website with Premium, Essential, and Ultimate tiers, which, by the way, all now include PC. For the first time now, Premium and Essential also include PC services, whereas previously the Ultimate tier was the only tier that included both console and PC services. But they don't include anything about PC Game Pass, so I feel like either, in the next 12 months, either they hike the price to the point where it's basically an irrelevancy or a redundancy, or get rid of it entirely. I don't think it's long for this world. I think they're just jacking up the price. They hope people, don't subscribe to that service and largely go away from that service over the long haul, because it doesn't make sense to give people a cheaper path into PC games on Microsoft platforms if in 12 months the only console platform that you're really pushing is also a PC. Like, it doesn't really make sense
Right.
in that world to try to have that duplication of services. But I mean, ultimately, just in my opinion, I think it's a sign that Microsoft is done chasing market share. I think they're going to try to soak their existing customers. Their new console offerings, they're not priced to move. Obviously, the ROG Ally at $600, $1,000 is not exactly something that's priced to move, make a lot of moves in the market. I don't think they want to address a very large pool of users, or at least they don't want to address a very large pool of users at the expense of large profitability. And I kind of suspect that that's where Microsoft is headed. And it's also another sign that the Bethesda and Activision acquisitions weren't free. And those games, especially in particular Call of Duty, which, as I pointed out, is being restricted to that Ultimate tier. You're not getting it on the Premium or Essential tiers, except for older Call of Duty titles. Like on Premium, you can get Modern Warfare 2, Modern Warfare 3, Call of Duty World War 2, but not Black Ops 6, not Black Ops 7, if ever, probably not within a year of launch. That needs to be kind of rationalized within the subscription price. And so I think that increase makes sense in that context. But even still, you'd kind of expect like Microsoft to do kind of a frog boiling water situation by gradually increasing the price, making huge headlines by increasing the price by 50% over the span of a few days here, and by 100% over the span of 2 years, because just 2 years ago it was $15 and they increased it to $17 and $20 and now $30. It's such a dramatic thing, and I think it gives people a big incentive to move off the service now that price is increased by such a massive margin. So I'm kind of wondering if that was the right move to bundle it with these service increases and increase the price by this margin, or if that actually discourages players from sticking on.
It's an interesting point, Oliver. On Reddit, I saw one of those graphs that did a monthly price comparison showing Game Pass Ultimate versus something like Netflix Premium. And it seems like Netflix has continuously increased in a very linear fashion from say 2018 through the current day, where Xbox kind of like did this thing where around 2019, mid 2019, the increase was so slow to almost like non-existent up until like 2023. So like they kind of slowed down the pace rather than like trying to upgrade or increase the price. And then clearly they sort of course corrected. So if you trace the line from like the start to the finish, it does, you could naturally see it be a more linear flow like Netflix, but the way they ended up doing it, they basically had to end up course correcting upwards really sharply at the end, which makes the whole thing seem a lot more consumer unfriendly. I mean, I know people complain about the increases of any service, but when you do it very gradually, it does tend to have less of an instant impact. But they've essentially just like kind of almost doubled it, right? It feels like,
Yeah, I mean, from 2023, it was $15
exactly,
US.
Exactly. So from 2023 till now, they've doubled the price, and people do feel that. They notice that. And there was another infographic going around showing Google searches for how to cancel Xbox Game Pass, where it was just like a flat line at the bottom up until this happened, and then it's a massive sharp jump in Google search results. So like, I feel like I mean, I'm sure they didn't want to do this, but something clearly drove them to massively increase the price, and they surely knew like this was gonna hit people a lot harder than a smaller, more typical increase would have, right? And I wonder what this means for the service in terms of the overall user base, whether they actually do end up losing a lot of subscribers, or if it just kind of like there's this initial kerfuffle, people are annoyed, but then they just keep going with it anyway.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a Disney Plus effect to this, where Disney Plus actually started as, pretty good value.
Yep.
Lots of stuff to watch. And then basically the price rises kept going to the point where people just decided they had enough. Mm-hmm. And I think that's basically what's happening here. In terms of the strategy behind it, surely, it's basic maths, right? They've basically been following a strategy of extreme value in order to grow a massive user base, right? And it's not growing. It's kind of plateaued, right? So how do you make more money if that's the case? And the answer is basically to increase the price points. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. But basic economics, surely.
Surely, but then, you increase it so much, then I'm sure they've done the numbers, but like how much is too much in terms of what it does to the user base? Because I feel like they're straddling that line here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's going to be a question for the future, right, in terms of how people actually respond to this. But I do think there is definitely a Disney Plus effect. There was also a comment from Sarah Bond at Tokyo Game Show 2025, reported by Game Watch. Basically, Sarah Bond saying Game Pass took in $5 billion in revenue and said it's a profitable business, and as more creators join Xbox Game Pass, payments to creators increase. So we think it's a good business for creators. So you've got that sort of comment from a senior exec saying, actually, we're making, it's profitable, things are going great. And then suddenly a few days later, you get these gigantic price rises, which suggests that it's not quite where they thought it was going to be, which I don't know. I just think it was a poor comment to make. No, because surely she would have known that these price rises were coming just a few days later.
I think there is some complicated accounting going on here, because Game Pass, I'm sure it's a profitable service if you are including costs that are specific to Game Pass, so the cost of licensing those games from third-party publishers. But how do you account and how do you factor in the cost of first-party development and foregone sales through the Game Pass service? That seems like a separate question. So it seems like there's always been this kind of accounting math kind of fuzziness going on, where Microsoft loves to say Game Pass is a profitable service, it's successful, we're doing great, but is that counting the fact that millions of people maybe aren't going to buy Avowed now because it's on Game Pass? That's kind of an open question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the strategy I thought was that basically those games would make a lot of money on platforms that are not Xbox, PlayStation, etc., in order to offset the sort of loss in revenue they may have been experiencing by putting it on Game Pass for Xbox. But clearly that's not been quite enough, I guess. Which isn't great. I mean, we had a lot of supporter comments on this one. Alan from the Discord weighs in with a typically controversial comment here.
Oh, Alan.
Hi guys. Surely this Game Pass price rise is as damaging as the Xbox One launch debacle. In their core market, the USA, the cost has gone from 20-something to 30, basically, and that 30 has a psychological effect on consumers. The only way I can see what Microsoft Xbox is trying to do with Play Anywhere succeeding is if they become the new Google Stadia. I'm not quite sure what that means.
What does that even mean? Yeah.
But in terms of the damaging, well, it is damaging, right? I'm not sure it's as damaging as the Xbox One launch debacle, because that was stratospheric. But I think the issue is with Microsoft is that there's a pattern emerging of bad news and it actually takes away from the successes that they've had, which has been like a phenomenally good first-party lineup of games. But there just seems to be this continuing sort of trajectory of just really poor news and what looks like bad decision making, whether it's layoffs, whether it's gigantic price rises for consoles, whether it's gigantic price rises for Game Pass. It's like all of the things that you expect, the positives you would expect from being a part of this ecosystem are slowly but surely being stripped away. Don't Be a Richard says, it feels like in 2025, the year of our Lord and Savior, that Microsoft has had negative press on a monthly schedule, be it repeat price rises, studio closures, staff layoffs, or a general realization by console owners that Xbox exclusives are no longer a thing. Given we have 2 months left in the year, what's on people's bingo cards for November and December? Will Microsoft celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Xbox 360 by pushing out a Red Ring of Death patch to all series console owners to brick their systems? Man, that's harsh. But that brings the other thing is that the meme, $360 a year for Game Pass Ultimate now. That's
the
celebration.
Meme, right?
Yep. Xbox $360. Todd Weitzel, there's a lot of wailing about the price increase on Game Pass Ultimate, but I note that cloud streaming is now included in the essential $9.99 a month plan. Feels like Xbox has added a plan above the existing Ultimate tier and moved everything down market. Has Game Pass Essentials value gone up as Ultimates has gone down? What do you think, Oliver? I think that basically just comes down to whether you're into cloud streaming or not.
Yeah, I think the essential development here isn't cloud streaming. It's the addition of PC support to all tiers.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Previously only in Ultimate, that's a big, big deal, I think, because obviously if you want to homogenize those offerings, rationalize them in an era where Xbox PC, Xbox as PC, these are key parts of your offerings, you don't want that relegated to just a PC Game Pass offering. The Game Pass Essentials value, I mean, really the benefit there that you're getting is PC. Obviously it's cloud streaming, but for a lot of users, they're just on Xbox. Those aspects don't appeal to them. And for those users, I think Microsoft said there are a handful of games, I think 3 or 4 games that are accessible and essential that weren't accessible a few days ago. That's pretty much it for those users.
Yeah. Interesting question on strategy here from Cookie Butter. What demographics do you think Xbox aims to retain or capture with Game Pass Ultimate's 50% price increase and Fortnite Ubisoft editions? Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I can't think of any kind of reasonable explanation for those additions to justify that kind of price point increase. And I just think there isn't a strategy here other than to essentially make more money. I don't think there's any sort of thoughts about, okay, right, who's this proposition going to appeal to? How are we going to get $30 out of them per month? I don't know. John, what do you think?
I don't know. Maybe board members with kids are like, yes, we can pay a little bit more, and then the kids can play with their Fortnites and all that. And I don't know. Maybe that.
I do think that Fortnite is probably going to appeal to younger players. And maybe the thinking is like get them in the door with Fortnite crew and maybe they'll enjoy Gears of War. Maybe they'll enjoy the AAA, whatever down the line.
Are the younger kids going to be the ones spending $30 a month? I don't think so.
Well, it's a high cost of entry.
Like I feel like this very specifically causes issues where like you have parents that are spending Game Pass money for their kids. And all of a sudden it's $30 and they're like, geez, okay, well, maybe we don't need that. Especially since, I don't know, you can still, if you just purchase games one by one, things can be a lot cheaper still. And it's not like kids are playing that many different games anyway these days, by and large.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just looking at the Ubisoft Classics collection. That's the games mentioned on Microsoft's PR here, and man, it's like
Tom Clancy's in there.
Yes, there is. Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Rainbow Six, The Division, Rainbow Six Extraction, but that's kind of highlighting the age of these games and the kind of lack of value. You know, nobody in their right mind would be saying, wow, let's add on the value of Ubisoft classics that I must pay every single month in order to play the likes of Uno, Zombie, the original Watch Dogs, Skull and Bones, and Oddballers.
So you're saying you get a quadruple A game for this money?
Well, there we go. Going back to what you were saying about PC Game Pass, Oliver, it's always kind of, I mean, there's a reason it's cheap. It's because at the time Microsoft was looking to expand Game Pass as much as possible. And the way to do that was to present, unbeatable value to a gigantic market, which is the PC. Didn't seem to quite pan out. But at the same time, the fact that it was so cheap, in stark contrast to the console user offering, it just kind of suggests that, well, what could you say? Microsoft values PC more than console, which, seems to be still the case, even more so today. But you're quite right. If the future of Xbox is that they're going to become hybrid PC devices, then surely that has either got to go away or these console-focused offerings have got to go away. I suspect you're right. It's going to be the cheaper offering that's going to go away. Any final points to say on this, John, before we move on?
I mean, I don't like to see this. We're reaching a weird point where it's coming down to feel like there's only going to be two main consoles left in the race. What Xbox's future seems to still be, very PC focused. So it's kind of its own separate thing at this point. It's not really good for the industry to only have two players that are perhaps arguably not even competing exactly in the same markets, right? We needed Xbox. We need something like this in its place. I don't think we're going to get it. And it just kind of shows where the industry's going in the future. So
right.
I don't know. I don't love it. I don't like to see the end of anything like this. We're losing classic console gaming here with this.
I think, the thing that sort of frustrates me is that there is actually great stuff happening at Xbox. They just seem to be doing a really poor job of telling people about it. They could have done a fantastic reveal of Forza Horizon 6 at TGS. Instead, you got, a rendered video of a bench and some sunglasses.
Was that not the most wet fart kind of reveal you can imagine? I'm sorry. Forza Horizon is an amazing series. I love those games. Those games have been on my games of the year list in the past. Mm-hmm. They're finally doing a Japan-based one, and that reveal was the most just like what the heck. They needed to come out and blow the doors off of expectations, and they could have done something so cool, and instead it's just it's a thing, and they've missed that first impression opportunity, right? That's what gets people talking. When you show something that's really cool right away, people are like, whoa, that looks great, I want to see that, But now they've lost that, and they do this stuff all the time, and I don't get it. They're just really bad with revealing the amazing games that they often have.
Yeah, then there was the whole Ally debacle, basically, where all of the good work in talking about the system was undermined by, the $1,000 price point that came out. Mm-hmm. I mean, surely, the basics of marketing is you basically get the bad news out the way first and then focus on the good news. That's kind of, surely the way to do it, as opposed to showing this really good device and saying, oh, by the way, it's going to cost you $1,000. Just astonishing stuff. The whole console price rise thing, obviously there are reasons behind it, but it's what can you say? The PlayStation side of things is not being as badly affected. So obviously it makes the PlayStation look a whole lot more appealing. Any final thoughts, Oliver?
No, it's just highly unfortunate that this is going on, and I think it's a sign of where Microsoft is trying to fit in the kind of value ecosystem in console gaming and in gaming more broadly, where I think they've found that they cannot attract this very large market share. They're trying to soak their existing user base, and ultimately doing day one games on Game Pass turns out to be extremely expensive when you have to rationalize 2,000 people working on Call of Duty and fit that into that structure. I just think it's an extremely expensive proposition. And I think it is kind of unfortunate because part of the value of Microsoft services historically has been this Game Pass offering. Since I think 2018 it started, 2017 it started. It's been a huge part of Microsoft's offerings. And I do wonder what the appeal of like next generation Microsoft hardware is if Game Pass is not seen as a reasonable part of it for that ultimate tier of services. And I also wonder how this is going to fare if we're looking at the situation in, let's say, a year or 2 years. You've got an Xbox console that is basically a PC out in the market. Microsoft does not have the PC Game Pass service around, or at least does not have it around in a cognizable form. And you have this $30 Game Pass Ultimate service. On consoles, that's a hard sell. On PC, it's even harder because all these legacy titles that you're looking at now, they're all available for like $2 or $3 on PC in many cases. So the value of that library is a lot less, I would say, on PC. So I wonder how they'll be able to sell those titles to an audience that's conditioned to basically free PC games past 6 months, 12 months, 18 months.
So, Rich, another thing that comes to mind on this, do you remember, not saying who it was, but like 2018 maybe, you and I, we were in London, we were meeting up with a guy from Xbox, and I was discussing some concerns over certain things with like physical media and the future of all this, and he just very clearly said Game Pass is the future. Said it multiple times, very, very strongly, saying Game Pass is the future, to us. And I didn't like what he had to say about this, but it sure did become the thing. And then, thinking about that now after what just happened, I don't know, it just puts an interesting spin on it.